Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar, Become a Mix Master with Data Blending. This webinar is part of our new customer webinar series, Talk Data to Me, which is aimed to provide tips, tricks, and how-tos to make you a more savvy Tableau customer. My name is Megan Fay, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Tableau. I'll be your moderator. Just a few quick items before we get started. All lines are currently muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A window and select Send to All Panelists. We'll answer questions at the end if time allows. If we don't get to your question, we will follow up with you after the webinar. A recording of this webinar and a copy of the workbook will be emailed out after the webinar, so look for that in the day after the webinar. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Bethany Lyons. Bethany is an associate sales consultant for Tableau based in London, and will be showing you the ins and outs of data blending in Tableau. Bethany, take it away.
All right, thanks, Megan. Welcome everyone to this webinar. So basically, just to go through the agenda quickly for today. I work a lot with customers. I'm part of the consulting team in London here, so I've just put together an agenda based on things that I've seen customers run into the most issues with or the most confusion. So hopefully in 30 minutes, you guys will all be ready to take it away and apply some of these principles to your own data when you're working with data blending. So first of all, we're going to start with just a simple example of data blending to show what's the difference between primary and secondary data sources. What does that mean in terms of the different questions that you might be asking of your data if you switch between which data source is your primary or secondary data source. And then we'll look at how you can do data blending when you have multiple, well, just one field that's common between your data sources, and what happens when you start to have multiple common fields between your data sources. And then we'll look at an example of how filters are applied across data sources as well. Then finally, we'll finish off with some best practices around joins versus blends. So when you should use which one, as well as some of the performance and implications around what method you choose. So just to start off here, this is just showing you a diagram of a left outer join. So those of you familiar with SQL or just regular joins, each one of these represents a table. So left outer join is when we basically take all of the data from the left table, table A, and just bring in what's common from table B. In Tableau language, when we're talking about data blending behaves as a left outer join, where the primary data source is like the left table in a left outer join. So just to make this a little bit less abstract, let's look at an example. So I have two different data sources, and I'll just bring them up in Excel. They're really small data sources just to make sure everyone gets familiar with the concept here. So this is a data source that shows the different patients that might be visiting a doctor's surgery and the appointment date when they're going to make their visit. Then we have another table here that shows the patient, another data source rather, that shows the patient history of all of these different patients, so their age, gender, illness, and things like that. So in a real scenario, you can imagine that these two sets of information would be stored in totally different data sources, and so that's why we would use data blending to be able to mix them together. So now let's suppose that you're the doctor in charge of this surgery wants to be able to see of all the upcoming appointments this week, which patients are coming in, and then display the patient history of those patients who are going to be visiting this week. So if I want to see who's coming in this week, I'm going to start off with my appointments data source, looking at patients and their appointment dates, and we'll just set that to an exact date here. And so this is now my primary data source, And a way to tell what your primary data source is it's just simply the first data source from which you bring dimension or measure into the view from. And that's indicated by this blue check mark that you see next to the data source in the upper left-hand corner of the data window. So now if I want to bring in my patient history, I'll come to the second data source here, and then I can grab the illness here and just, maybe I'll put it like this, and just drop that right here on the row shelf. All right, so now we can see some patient history about these 5 patients, but we're seeing this null value show up here, and that's because Sam and Will are not in the patient history data source, and that's because they're brand new patients. So I can just edit the alias here and call these new patients. So no need to worry if you see null values appearing. Sometimes people think it's a data quality issue. It might be, but it might also mean something like new patient, so you can simply alias that. Now, the second scenario is we might want to basically reverse the question that we're asking. So there we were looking at who's coming in this week, who has an appointment, but you might want to instead ask, of all of the patients that I have in my practice, who is going to be visiting in the upcoming year or whatever time period you're looking at? I don't know where you guys live, but we're in the UK. Basically doctors are incentivized to vaccinate a certain number of a certain % of patients in their practice. So that's kind of the scenario where they'd want to see that. So in this case, we want our primary data source to be the patient history table. So we want to switch which is the primary data source. And so the way that you do that is simply now we'll go to the patient history data source, and that's the first data source from which we bring the dimension into the view. And now you'll see that blue check mark is next to patient history, so we know that in this worksheet, this is the primary data source. So just one fundamental major difference between joins and blends is that when you join tables in a data source, that connection is fixed. Whereas with blending, you're dynamically changing which is your primary and secondary data source from worksheet to worksheet. And so now, if we now we basically want to compare the different illnesses of our patients here. Or maybe, wait, we'll do it like this. And then we want to look at when they're coming in. So I can just grab the appointment date here. And now I see that the appointment date is null for Chris and Megan. So that means that these patients haven't booked an appointment. So they're people that are at risk, I guess, of not getting their vaccinations done this year. So the null values are actually the ones of interest where you would then want to go follow up with those patients as well. And then just another thing to point out here is that anything that's from a secondary data source is denoted with orange. So the appointments data source here has that orange check mark next to it, and we can see here that anything, so appointment date has a little orange cylinder on it as well. So just a way to check in your view if a field is from the primary or secondary, look for those orange checks on the pills. And then the third type of join that you could do with data blending is an inner join. And so that's where you want to keep just what's common between the two data sources. So in our scenario here, that would mean of all of the patients in or all of the existing patients in my practice show me all the existing patients in my practice who have an appointment this week. So the way that you would do that kind of an inner join is just simply by excluding the null values. So that tells you these people have a prior history and they also have an appointment. All right, so that's just to give you a brief example, a brief introduction to how you kind of switch between data sources and how the questions that you're asking can change based on what's your primary or secondary data source. Now, the second scenario that we're going to look at here is a little bit different. So now we're looking at a sales data set. And again, this is just a really simple data set just to get everyone familiar with kind of the principles behind how this is working. Okay, so we have some data on customers. Customers buy products from stores, and there's some sales value attached to those orders. And that's in one system. And then we have another data source which contains our marketing data. And so in this marketing data, we basically send promotion vouchers to customers for specific products, and they're delivered via a particular method. So it's possible, there's lots of different scenarios that are possible with this data. It's possible that a customer receives a voucher and then redeems that by making a purchase. And it's also possible that they receive a voucher and they don't redeem it. Equally, it's possible that they don't receive a voucher, but they still make a purchase. So all of those different scenarios are important to keep in consideration when we're doing this kind of analysis. So one question we might want to look at is, what's the correlation between sales and vouchers sent out? So here we could just look at our products and what are sales by products. And then I'm going to go to my secondary data source here, the promotions data source. And notice that there are two common fields between these data sources. There's both customer name as well as product. The linking field here is actually highlighted on product because that's what we're analyzing in our view, whereas we haven't actually activated that link on customer name. So Tableau has some intelligence built in where it will just link on the dimension you have in your view. So now if I bring in my promotion vouchers, I've just done a little color coding here, so in terms of blue and orange, it's clear to you that blue is from the primary, orange is from the secondary. So now we can compare those two different metrics here. And now if we had instead looked at customers, so what's the correlation between sales and vouchers? In other words, is a customer more likely to have a lot of purchases if they have also received quite a few marketing vouchers? So let's just replace that here. And if you come back to your secondary data source, something interesting to notice here is that the blend field has now changed. So Tableau has dynamically picked up that customer name is in the view, and that should be the linking context of this worksheet. So just something to keep in mind, that those links will change, or they could change as you're changing what's in your view. And now let's link on both customer and product. And you'll see that this has now affected our promotion vouchers. So before we had 1, 2, and 2, and when I've linked on that, now we have 0 vouchers for Jim, and 1 for Joe, and 1 for Mary. And now people sometimes get very, very afraid of this, and they go, oh my goodness, this is broken, what's going on? My data is disappearing. But actually, it's because you've just changed the question that you're asking by activating that link. So in the case where we only link on customer name, the question that we're asking is, show me how many vouchers each customer received. So Joe clearly received 2, Jim received 1, and Mary received 2. And that's exactly what we see in this scenario here. But now as we link on a secondary field, the question is now, how many vouchers were actually redeemed. Because now we're looking at the combination of customer and product. So we're saying Joe received a promotion voucher for furniture. Did Joe buy furniture? No, he did not, and so that voucher doesn't get counted. Then we look at the next row and say, Joe received a voucher for technology. Did he actually redeem it? And then we see, yes, he did. So Joe redeemed one voucher, and that is exactly what we see in the view here. Then we go down to Jim and say, Jim received a voucher for office supplies. Did he redeem it? No, he did not, and therefore 0 is showing up for Joe. And now Mary received a voucher for furniture and office supplies. Did she actually redeem those? Only one of them, only the one for furniture, and so that's why Mary is showing up as having just one promotion voucher. So it's very powerful that you can actually change the question in the analysis that you're doing by turning on and off these linking fields, but it's not always really obvious. So just a recommendation is to grab a small subset of data and kind of figure out, like we just did here, what does it actually mean when you're changing these linking fields. Now, this gets even more fun when you start bringing filters into play. So here we're looking at this, let's go back to when we just had it linking on customer. So now let's say we want to look at how many customers, for each customer, how many promotion vouchers did they receive in the mail. So now I'm going to come to the delivery method, put that on the product, or sorry, on the filter shelf, and then I'm going to just keep mail only. And now we have lost Jim. He's disappeared from this analysis. So let's look at what does that mean when we're linking only on customer name. Well, we are basically saying keep only these rows. Yeah, Joe, Jim, Mary. So Mary has, so basically what we're saying is, did Joe receive a voucher in the mail? Yes, he did. So we keep all of, we keep both of these records for Joe. The other thing you want to notice is that Joe has sales of $30. And if we come back to the primary, you'll see that Joe purchased exactly $30. So we're keeping all of his sales, even though some of them were not for vouchers that he actually redeemed. The question here is purely, show me sales for customers who at some point received a voucher in the mail. And likewise for Mary, she received one voucher in store, but she also received one voucher in the mail. Therefore, we keep that one promotion voucher for Mary that came from the mail, but we keep all of the sales values, so $90 of sales. We keep all of the sales values for Mary. So it depends on, again, what kind of analysis do you want to do? Do you want to see the total sales of customers who at some point received a voucher in the mail? Or do you want to see the total sales of customers who redeemed a voucher that they received through the mail? And if that's the case, then you're going to want to link on product. And you'll see that as I hit that link on product, now we've totally lost Mary. And we're only left with Joe, and we're only left with one voucher. So despite the fact that he received two. So what did Joe buy? Joe bought technology. So this record here, Joe received a voucher for technology through the mail, and he redeemed it for a sale of $20. And that's exactly what we're seeing in this view here. Whereas Mary, she bought furniture and technology, but she didn't get a voucher for either furniture or technology in the mail. She only got a voucher for office supplies. So Mary didn't redeem any vouchers that she got through the mail, therefore she's disappeared from this completely, and we don't see her sales. So again, just need to be aware of when you're filtering on things and when you're blending on different join keys, what does that actually mean in terms of the question that you're asking. So now in the last 10 minutes here, we're going to talk a bit about best practices around when to use joins versus blends. So the short answer is we join tables from the same data source and we blend tables from different data sources. But the long answer is it depends on your data structure. So if you have a nice star schema, you'll always want to join the tables in a star schema. But if you have tables in the same data source that have many-to-many relationships or many-to-one relationships, you'll want to use blending. And so an example of that is if you're trying to connect multiple fact tables, you'll almost never want to join multiple fact tables. And that's because of the replication that can occur across the data. So I'm going to just make the first two examples were not very real world. It was just to kind of get you comfortable with what's actually going on. And so now we're going to connect to a database and look at what actually happens in the real world by looking at some AdventureWorks data. So this is much more common of structure of how customers' data looks. So in this AdventureWorks data, one of the tables that we have is the sales order header data source. And this is basically a table that each row is an order ID. And so it tells us the total amount of that order. It tells us the tax paid on that order, shipping method, the address of the customer, things like that. So when you connect to a database like this, you might not be totally familiar with the schema, and it could be slightly irresponsible, let's say, to just join all of the tables together, and we're going to look at why. So the way that I always try to reverse engineer a database schema that I might not be familiar with is by connecting just to one table, just a primary table, grabbing the number of records, and so now I see there's 31,000 records in this sales order table. And so I want to make sure that every single time that I join a table, so the address table, that doesn't blow out the number of records. So I'll add this address table and then go back to my data source, and now I see that it's still at 31,000 records, so that's okay. I can join those two things together. And then I'll go back and try and add some more detail about the location, so the state and province. And then finally, I might want to add the country. And if the number of records remains on 31,000, which it does, this is good. I can join these tables, no problem. So now, let's say we're looking at our, where it's easier to just type it in here, country. There it is. I want to see, I don't know, I can start looking at this across countries. Actually, sorry, let me go back. Let's say now you want to, we know that we have some geographic information in here, but let's say that you want to also look at some information about products. And I don't actually have products in this table. That is contained in another table that looks at sales order detail. So I can bring that in. It's joining on the sales order ID. All is well. That contains, if you search through here, you'll see it contains the products. And now I come back here and look what happened. Now the number of records is 121,000. So it's multiplied this by like 4 point some times. And so this is really, really, really not good, because this means that you're going to think you have way more money than you do. And you don't want to be the person to deliver that kind of news to your boss and then find out a week later that it's only a fourth of the amount. So in this circumstance, we cannot join these two tables, and it's because they're at different levels of granularity. The first 4 tables that we connected to were at the order ID level. But this order detail table is at a more granular level because it contains product level information, and there's multiple products on a single order. So we'll end up then replicating our order level values across the product IDs. So just to show you an example of this, if we're looking at the total amount by sales order ID, and then we look at this by product ID, you'll see that on this particular order, the total amount of the order is only 187,000, but that's being replicated across all of the product rows. So this order value is multiplied by the number of products on that order. And you'll see that if we remove that, it looks now like this order is worth $11 million. So that's very bad news. And so in this case, you would really want to make 2 separate connections to those data sources. And so I've got that here, these 2 separate connections, just to show you another scenario that will come up with data blending. And this is something you've probably seen before, and it's when you see the star show up. And that's something that frustrates a lot of people, but it's in fact a very good thing because it prevents you from doing, I guess, irresponsible things with data. So let's say that you're looking at the total amount by, actually let's look rather at the tax amount by different countries. And then you want to see, well, actually how much tax, not only do I want to see how much tax was paid per country, but now show me, coming to the order detail data source, which contains product level detail, show me how much was, where's product category name, how this tax amount is split up by products. And so if I bring these products into the view, I'm seeing a star for a couple of reasons. The first is that we haven't linked on anything because the default behavior of Tableau is just to link on the dimensions you have in the view. And we don't have a dimension in the view that's common between these data sources. The only thing that's common is sales order ID, so I actually have to go and activate that link by clicking on it. And now they're blended, so we see some detail here, but the majority of our tax amount is falling in this bucket where the product name has a star on it. And so, again, this is a scenario that causes people to go, oh my gosh, what's wrong with Tableau? It's broken. What does that star mean? So I built together, just quickly here, a little dashboard to explain what does the star actually do. So this view on the left here is just some bins that show you orders product on them. So 17,000 orders have 1 product on them, 10,000 orders have 2 products on them, and so on. And so now we can use this here as a filter to try and identify what's the difference between the things that have a star and the things that don't. So if I click on accessories, you'll see that every order in this bucket here only has one product on the order. And that's true for bikes, and that's true for clothing, and that's true for components. But if I come click on the star, the opposite is true. There are all of the orders in this bucket that have the star have either 2, 3, or 4 products on the order. And so what you're asking with this question here, this viz on the left-hand side here, is take the tax amount that was paid at the order level and divide that up across 3 products. But we don't actually have that information. It doesn't exist. The tax amount is recorded at an order level, not at an individual product level. So how can you possibly ask your database to tell you how much tax you paid per product when it's recorded on an order basis that contains multiple products? So if you see this star ever show up when you're working with data blending, it's probably because you're trying to do some kind of analysis and ask some kind of question that doesn't actually exist in the data source. So just something to be aware of to help you troubleshoot why that might be occurring when you're doing blending. And the other thing is that will only occur, you'll only ever see the star appear from a secondary data source. So sometimes you can avoid this issue just by swapping, which is your primary and secondary data source. So that was just to give you a brief introduction to data blending, some of the things to watch out for, how it can be useful, and just hopefully, I don't know if we have time, Megan, for some questions.
Yeah, we had one question come in, and I think it's one that I'm sure a lot of people are wondering. When you're data blending, if the dimension fields are named differently, will Tableau automatically recognize that they are the same fields and link them, or do you have to change the name of the dimensions for Tableau to recognize?
Okay, that's a great question, thanks. So there's a couple ways that you can do it. So one is by just renaming the field here. So let's say it was like this. That link is not able to be made, so you can just rename it manually here. That's one way to do it, and then it will make the connection. The other way to do it is by just going into Data, Edit Relationships, and then you can define the relationship between the sources here directly. So sales with promotions, it's picked them up automatically, but you can also do a custom join where you add a join here as well if you don't want to rename the field.
Okay, great, thanks. We are out of time today, so if you did ask a question, we'll follow up with you after the webinar. I want to thank Bethany for presenting that quick session on data blending. It's a complex topic, and she only scratched the surface. The next webinar in this series is on Thursday, June 25th at 10 a.m. Pacific, and we'll be discussing table calculations. I hope you can join us then. Thanks for joining this session, part of our Talk Data to Me series. Go ahead and check out the schedule on our website, and we look forward to seeing you in a future webinar. Thank you.